I thank you for your interesting address to this House today, and I wish you very well in your tenure as Lord Mayor of Belfast. Gora Mahagut. And now I call on you, Lord Mayor, now for your concluding remarks. You would wind up concluding remarks from the Lord Mayor. Yeah.
Thanks very much, and just firstly, thank you to all the members again just for sharing your own personal stories and just your words of encouragement. And I hope this does stand us in good stead in the months and years to come of really harnessing and developing the relationships. And I suppose if Brexit has taught us anything, is that it's to really focus in that having those relationships, creating those relationships, building on the trust is fundamental, because at the end it will be to the benefit of all of our citizens right across the island. And just to reflect, I mean, Brexit and the border is a massive issue. It's on the tips of everyone's lips and tongues every single day in my city, and I know right across the island. And the Good Friday Agreement is fundamental, from the sense that it was a referendum in which all people across the island voted, and voted overwhelmingly for that peace agreement. And living in the city and growing up in a city that has been torn apart by political conflict and by division, I can see the massive benefits of that agreement even in the short 20 years. And I think, I mean, as someone who works in a reconciliation background, and working with former combatants and working with communities that are segregated and divided, the absence of armed conflict does not all result in peace. You have to build the peace, and the consequence of a Brexit could unravel that. And I don't say that just to kind of throw it out, but there are massive concerns, because we do have, I suppose, an infancy in our peace process. We're a very young process. It is only 20 years in the making, and it is something that's held up in international regards. But we still need to nurture that process, and Brexit could have a massive detrimental impact. And as a city that is trying to move forward, particularly our young people, and I know that's shared right across the island, this is a big concern for them in the time ahead. And obviously, when we're looking to grow the economy, we don't want to chase away that young talent. We want to retain it within our cities and within our communities as well. And I suppose I would stress again just the role, the crucial role of the Irish Government, of the Seanad, in terms of representing those right across the north and across the island, but particularly being wedded to the Good Friday Agreement as a co-guarantor. And I suppose, I mean, because I was just thinking back when somebody said in terms of the image of a place, and I thought back to the Carrickdale Hotel, so just right at the border. This was pre-Good Friday Agreement. I was actually at a team building residential with a number of women's organisations from right across the north. And at that point, you still had the army checkpoints in South Armagh that were still, you could see them from the Carrickdale Hotel. And I remember sitting in the hotel that night, and 2 residents from just beyond Dublin come up to stay in the hotel. And when they realised it was a British Army checkpoint or station post on the mountain, they checked out of the hotel that night because they were so fearful of going near the north. And that's not something that we want to go back to. We don't want to go back to those times. And obviously, it's taken us 20 years to change the image of the city, to change the image of society on an international basis, and we don't want anything that will set us going back in that. And obviously, I listen closely to the points around the Commonwealth of Nations, and I think all options, when you're starting to look at what a new Ireland could look like, all options have to be on the table. All options need to be discussed. We need to look at what brings most of the people right across the island together. That includes those who are unionists, particularly nationalists, those who don't really assign to anything. And I would say that all of those options do need to be discussed and on the table. In terms of retaining relationships post-Brexit, I mean, it's crucial, no matter what the outcome is, and I don't know what the outcome is standing here now, but we need to actually focus and build on the relationships even more to ensure that we're building strong foundations for whatever comes in the time ahead. And indeed, I have been meeting, I've met with the mayors of Dublin and Cork over recent months in this post, and that's been predominantly around remembrance events at Island Bridge, also when the Pope came to Ireland. And again, I would agree with some of the comments made that we need to move beyond those events in terms of looking at social implications of our cities, looking at economic connections of our cities, and really starting to forge and build links around those key issues. I'm also meeting the Mayor of Dublin later on today, and again it's around building on the Memorandum of Understanding that we have between our two cities. Other things that we're looking to do around infrastructure is a high-speed rail connection between Belfast and Dublin, and there's a feasibility study that is being looked at the moment, in which the councils that span along the corridor between Belfast and Dublin have actually put money into that feasibility study. And again, we would like to come back just to give you updates. But that's only one example of the growth and the connection that we can look at. We also want to retain our connections with Europe as well, and I think that's critical as an island. And again, I will be representing Belfast, and I know other cities across the island will be attending the Eurocities conference in Edinburgh at the end of this month. And there will be a conversation at that conference around the role of cities in emerging socially and emerging politically and emerging economically as well. And indeed, I would just, I suppose, encourage any of the other cities across the island to attend that conference. And again, I'm always open to having further engagement with them. On the issue of rights, and it has come up and it's really fundamental into the fore, on the one hand, of why the institutions haven't been re-established, but also that has seen thousands upon thousands of people take to the streets, to the front of the building that I sit in the City Hall over the last couple of years, whether that's been language rights, LGBT, marriage equality rights, women's rights, rights around legacy and dealing with the past. And the big thing that is emerging, I mean, these aren't orange and green issues, and I think that's the critical thing, that we can't just pigeonhole them or sectarianise them into orange and green issues. Rights are international, they're universal, they impact on all of the citizens, and that's the conversation that we need to have, and that's one of the reasons that I chose to launch a Mayor's Charter on rights in the city, was to lift that debate, because one of the critical factors of the Good Friday Agreement was the introduction of a Bill of Rights, which has still never materialised. And if that had been introduced, a lot of these issues in which people in my city are out campaigning on the streets about would have been contained within that Bill of Rights. And I want to play my part in working with those organisations, and I'm actually going to be launching it on the 10th of December, which is Human Rights Day, and on the 70th anniversary of the signing of the Charter. And indeed, that will look at a variety of issues around women. I know it was touched on. Mental health is a massive issue. The fact that more people in the north have now taken their own lives through suicide, more have died through suicide since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement than all of those that died as a result of the political conflict, is massive, and it's a massive issue that we need to address. One of the issues when you look at gender is that the British Government have not signed up to UN Resolution 1325. There's no action plan for the North around women's issues, around action plans that start to really look at gender principles around female representation in politics, on bodies, but also looking at gender action plans around mental health, around community participation, and that's one of the things, again, that we need to encourage. The British Government need to sign up. The Irish Government are implementing those action plans, but the vacuum is in the north, where it's probably needed the most. And again, I would implore that any influence that could be brought to bear on that is key. Some did touch on in terms of reconciliation and, I suppose, the Connaught Rangers. And again, I've done a lot of work within Belfast City Council, but also working in the city on the need around remembrance, around addressing the decade of centenaries. And I actually think Belfast City Council really adopted a positive approach. We set, after the election back in 2011, we agreed a set of principles because we knew the decade of centenaries coming up. The Battle of the Somme, the 1916 Easter Rising, the signing of the Ulster Covenant, to name but a few, could have actually led to a heightened in tensions or conflicts in the streets of Belfast. All the political parties, I am glad to say, in Belfast City Council, right across the spectrum, signed up to a set of principles in which we could mark all of those occasions, in which we could look at those occasions in their wider contexts. So looking at them from a gender perspective, from a class perspective, from an international perspective. And we created the Decade of Centenaries which for the first time I never would have thought in my lifetime Belfast City Council hosted 3 civic dinners, one to mark the signing of the Ulster Covenant in 1912, and then 2 dinners in 1916 to mark the 1916 Easter Rising and also the Battle of the Somme. And indeed we're moving again in terms of looking at the memorabilia within the building and how we can make that more reflective to ensure that it looks at all of the backgrounds and all of the narratives. And one of the issues is around, someone mentioned in terms of Winifred Carney. And actually the story of Winifred Carney herself really reflects well in terms of the complexity of her past. Our past isn't black and white, it's more layered and complex. The fact that my chain of office in Belfast has Erin go Bragh, the chain of office in Dublin has King William. Some people seem to think that they were switched, but it just shows that it's the complexity. But we have a deep and shared history, and it's all of our history. We all own that history, and we all have to own the future. And I suppose when you look at the Winifred Carney story, she was an Irish Republican from Belfast, was in the GPO in 1916 with James Connolly. Her future husband, George McBride, was a UVF volunteer, an Orange man from Belfast as well, who then, in the same year, 1916, was fighting with the British at the Battle of the Somme. They both returned to Belfast, fell in love. They were both trade union activists working with the city's poor, and then they fell in love and they got married. And I just think it's a really beautiful story, which kind of, in a way, sums up the complexity of her past. But also gives hope for the future as well. And I suppose the big thing for me in terms of reconciliation is dialogue. We need to get to know one another. And I mean, I see this in Belfast when you're dealing with interface tension, where communities are actually at a street that divides the two communities, and they don't know one another. They don't know the issues that each other are impacted by. And we have learned over time that dialogue, getting to know one another, the fact that I'm hearing your perspective here today and you're hearing mine, may widen our own horizons and thoughts and may push buttons or perceptions that we may have ourselves. And if you get to know, then that's how you build trust. And to build trust, then that's how you can reach agreements and compromises, if you have that trust. And I suppose when we look at the institutions, that's definitely what's needed. Of course, we need institutions up and running, but we need those institutions on solid foundations as well. And we do need the outstanding issues, particularly around rights, which were enshrined in the Good Friday Agreement, to be implemented, because I know if that doesn't happen, they will be outside the front of City Hall demanding their rights within society. And I suppose just last but not least, the end is around that I do hope that it's an opportunity. I mean, I know this is historic, and we are keen as a city and as a council to really strengthen our engagements, to strengthen our connections with other towns and other cities right across the island. We want to look at the tourism and trade potential that really lifts the prosperity of all of our citizens, with inclusive growth being key to that. And we want to look at infrastructure, so we want to look at the roads, the train networks, and there's nothing to say that if you got Belfast and Dublin, that couldn't be expanded into Derry and also to Cork or across to Galway or beyond. We want to look at innovation and research in terms of making sure that as an island, when we're going out as a proposition across the world, that we're seen as a real hub around innovation and advanced research, and how that has an impact on advanced manufacturing. Tourism was touched on. There's massive potential, and as a city we want to double our tourism spend by 2020. And again, if we go to market as one, we've done that recently with Tourism Ireland when we went to China. We've done a joint trade mission, and that's already seeing fruitful benefits with the Chinese market. And indeed, educational links. We know that there are a lot of students in Belfast that are studying in Dublin. If you look at the infrastructure, there would be nothing to say that they could be commuting between the two cities, whether you're doing education or whether you're doing business. And indeed, obviously, the culture, I think there could be massive potential, whether that's the European Capital of Culture or other cultural programmes, to start to deepen the understanding of our cultural offering right across the island, to look at opportunities, how we can promote the island through our cultural offering collectively, And arts obviously play a critical role in that. And there is a campaign in the North at the moment around Arts Matter and the impact that the arts have and the investment in the arts. And obviously that's something that we want to build on as well, because it has a social impact, it has an economic impact, but we have also seen that it has an impact on building reconciliation, building the peace process in the North, and using the art as a way of trying to break down barriers or trying to break down fears and perceptions. And at the end, I just want to say that there is the opportunity to use our cities to make those connections, and also to look at the inclusion of the surrounding areas to ensure that they feel the benefit. And it's really doing this for our young people, for the next generation of people, for those who have talent and aspirations, to ensure that they do have a future and that their future is on the island of Ireland. So, Gor Mila Mayagov.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And now I call on the Leader of the House to make some concluding remarks.
Margaret Lascahirock Arvera, the Colori, Shanadori, Marfocal, Skur, Brunham, Fear Breakers, Goalden Arvera, Asokton, Garrod, Untuk, August Darul, August Anna Symbolic. In welcoming the Lord Mayor and thanking her, I'm not going to delay the House further because we've had a lot of speeches, and I actually was thinking, Senator O'Donnell, that we had the wrong member from Belfast in the chamber, given the wonderful eloquence of the Lord Mayor.
There's time yet, Jerry. There's time yet.
I don't mean that in the last of it now, as you know, but I think it is important that we welcome the Lord Mayor Aaron Lástarúil Shaw. In the history of the Seanad granting permission, or not permission, but allowing people to address us, we have drawn on a huge group of people. In the last Seanads, the Cathaoirleach then Senator Paddy Burke had Drew Nelson from the Orange Order here. Today we have the Lord Mayor of Belfast. I would contend, Lord Mayor, that in any event, Cork will always be the second city, even when we come together as a country. But it is important that your visit is acknowledged in that we are building bridges. It is about ensuring that the voice of all people, north and south of Ireland, is heard and is held in this chamber. The flag behind us, the flag of our country, symbolises all of us, and your presence today does that. I want to welcome your Chief Executive and commend you and all for the sterling work that you are doing in Belfast. Like Senator Warfield, I like visiting Belfast. I think the Kremlin is one of the best places to be. Not in Moscow, let me add, but it's a wonderful, safe city for those of us of the LGBT community, and anything that we can do in this part of the island to promote equality, in particular on the issue of marriage equality, then there is a duty on all of us to do that and to advance the cause of equality. It is about collaboration, Cathaoirleach. It is about developing links, as the Lord Mayor said. It's about also recognising that Belfast has made a significant journey in terms of peace and reconciliation, in terms of economic development, in terms of its people. And that's to be welcomed. And I think all of us recognise that peace that has been won cannot be taken lightly. And your remarks make reference to engaging with people. And I certainly hope that we can, all of us, engage further in ensuring that that peace is not just fragile, but is cemented and concretised, and that will be there for the next generation. Because none of us want to go back to the days where we woke up to television news reports or radio reports or read newspapers of the killings of people on both sides of the divide. Those days, we hope, are gone and will never come back. You speak about unique quality to Seanad. Well, you certainly saw part of it today before you came in terms of some of the carry-on. And I apologise to you for the delay. And I know that Senator Norris is mad to get into the debate on the judicial appointments. But I'm conscious of that. I'm conscious of that.
And can I apologise for not being here? I had a long-standing engagement, but I was so impressed with what you said, Mayor.
I think Minister and Tánaiste Coveney spoke here this week about Brexit being more than just about economics, about the lives of people, and you touched it in your remarks. And as a government, we've been very clear in our position, and our position hasn't changed. it is about North-South being represented by our government in terms of the outcome at the end of Brexit and whatever that will bring. And solidarity from a European context is not minus the north of our country. It's inclusive of that. And when we talk about no hard border, we mean that. And that's the reality. Can I finish? Cathaoirleach and the Lord Mayor in her concluding remarks made reference to the need for, I think, devolved government to return. Her presence today in this chamber illustrates the importance of politics and democracy. The Lord Mayor, through her presence and her participation in this debate today, signifies that politicians get things done. We do need devolved government to return in our north. We need to see both parties that are at the table in terms of the DUP and Sinn Féin, along with the other parties, joining together to get Stormont back running. It's important from a lot of reasons, not least because of the issues of equality, but also from a financial point of view, given that we have Brexit impending. Lord Mayor, you have inspired us today. You spoke in your remarks about Belfast being a city of aspiration. I think today that by your presence and your remarks, and in particular around your Charter of Equality, Empowerment and Prosperity, bode well for Belfast and the city. They are very lucky to have you, and I don't say this patronisingly, but to see you here and to hear you it has been very impressive, and I wish you well for the remainder of your tenure. Donnghaile.
Thank you. Thank you, Leader. That concludes that item.